The price of carbon has had its most volatile year yet, so the government is stepping in. Are investors ditching the carbon market out of fear?
You've got to be a little bit careful, because if it's too volatile and too uncertain, people will say, I can't invest in that market.
It's Friday the 4th of August and you're watching Markets with Madison. There's one asset I haven't really talked about in depth on here yet, and I feel like it's time. Commodities have had a crazy year. The price of oil just had its best July in nearly 2 decades, with Brent crude lifting about 15% last month. But the commodity that I'm going to focus on in this specific episode is the carbon market. It's been so volatile, changes are now being made. Let me explain. New Zealand is one of 25 countries that has an emissions trading scheme, alongside most of Europe, China, Korea, and Kazakhstan. The scheme gave birth to the carbon market, effectively a government construct where emitted carbon is priced and units of it are traded. Participating businesses are required to give 1 unit to the government for every tonne of CO2 they produce, as a way to offset it. Investors can participate in the market by trading carbon credits or get exposure to them through the CO2 fund on the NZX. But that's down 34% in the past year. That's because the price of carbon has swung wildly this year, falling as low as 34 New Zealand dollars last month. Like a stock market, the carbon market of credits trades every day, but there's only 4 carbon auctions a year where units are allocated into the scheme. For the past 2 auctions, no units were bought because the bids didn't meet the price requirements. That means an extra almost 9 million unsold carbon units will be added to the September auction, an even tougher level to clear. ANZ says traders have had little confidence in the carbon market while a government review took place. Last week those changes were announced, including almost doubling the auction floor price and cutting the amount of units entering the ETS by 17 million over 5 years. Nigel Brunel is Jarden's head of commodities, known behind closed doors to some as the Carbon King. He helped conceptualise our ETS. So if anyone can tell us what on earth is going on with this complex market, it's him. Hey Nigel, how are you?
Hey, going well.
Good,
Yeah.
so good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
What on earth is happening in New Zealand's carbon market? I see that offer prices are not meeting the minimum requirements set. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So obviously talking about the auctions first, right? So there are 4 auctions a year in our ETS, and the government does set a minimum price that it will sell units for. There's often a belief, they use the word kind of fail when it comes to auctions, as if that's some kind of failure of policy. It's quite okay for a carbon auction not to clear. What that basically means is the market doesn't need the supply. So the participants in the market are saying, thanks very much, but we don't need to buy those at that price this time, and that's fine.
So the units come into the ETS at each auction. For the past 2 though, those units have not traded. So there's about 9 million units sitting there that will then go to the next September auction. Does that not mean that the market is inefficient if the supply isn't being sold?
Look, it is a really good question, and there's a little bit of complexity there. So I might just back it up a little bit and say the government's got this descending cap on emissions. It wants to get to net zero by 2050, and when it's putting that cap and that descending cap into place, it has to supply the market with units, which it does part supply through the auction. But often there's been units already trading in the market, and there's been a build-up of units. So when the participants that need to buy those units see the auction, they'll look at their own supply and say, do we need to buy any? And if they don't, they won't. And then those units will then go through the next auction and the next auction. But if they don't sell, then they're effectively cancelled that year. They won't come into the system, which basically just says the market's got enough supply at the moment. So it's not a bad thing, or it's probably not even a thing that the auction doesn't clear. Some people say, well, the government's not getting their money, but the government kind of plans for that also, right? It's just a temporary thing that we're seeing in the market. The market's got enough supply, and therefore we don't need those units. The only thing I'd add to that is that if the auction doesn't clear, then the next auction there's double the amount, and if that doesn't clear, then there's more again. It does make it harder to clear, but to be fair, if people wanted those units, they'd step up and buy them.
At what price though? There's been changes to that, has there not? Please explain.
Yeah, so there's the market that just trades. So it is an ETS, an emissions trading scheme. So it's got this, this target for where we want our emissions, but the market trades as part of an emissions trading scheme. So that market trades every day, and probably a good half of the units that are going to be bought or sold in any year happen in that market. The auction's 4 times a year, which kind of is over the top to make sure the market's well supplied. So let's not forget this whole market's been operating for kind of 15 years and maybe 2 or 3 years under this new ETS. So there is a supply of units out there. And also, let's not forget, we might chat about that later, is forestry is also a methodology within the emissions trading scheme that supplies units as well.
Okay, let's talk about forestry then. Say you own a forest, or you are any of these other big businesses that are emitters and they're having to participate in the ETS. If you're looking at this and saying none of the units are clearing, it looks to me like it may not be working, how should you feel about that?
Yeah, I think you probably should do more investigation and trying to understand what's going on, and perhaps speak to those, in the market if you can find them, but they're around. They can probably give you some clarity around that. It is a market at the end of the day, so the price is going to go up or down, and naturally, at some points in time, that price may suit some participants and it may not suit others. But at the end of the day, it is a market, so the market price kind of is where the market's trading, and that's like any market, stock market, foreign exchange market, commodity market, the price is the price. So that's where it is trading. But naturally, whether, let's say you're a forest owner, you might say, well, if the market's trading above $60 in NZU, I'm happy to participate because I can find some land, plant some trees, put it into the ETS for cheaper than $60 in NZU. Or if I'm an emitter and I'm saying, look, prices are here, yes, I can kind of live with that, but I'm probably going to have to make some changes to the way I use energy, because that price of carbon is having an impact. That's kind of what it's designed to do, to kind of create investment, so a price that's good enough for people to go, yeah, I want to invest in different kinds of energy, or I want to invest in forestry as part of the supply equation. Then the market's kind of doing its work.
There is a confidential reserve price though. Do you know what it is? Can you tell us?
Yeah.
Or how is somebody supposed to know?
I know exactly what it isn't. No, I have no idea what it is. So basically, so this is important to understand, there is an auction floor that's in the regulation. From December this year, under the change that the government's just made, it's going to be $60 as the auction floor. But obviously the market moves around. So at every auction, the government will look to see where the market is trading and put a confidential reserve price to make sure they don't sell units too cheaply.
But now they're not selling at all. So have they got that price wrong?
Well, yes and no, right? Because I think, at the end of the day, we'll get back to the earlier point. If people wanted those units and needed those units, then the auction would clear. And there's actually enough supply in the market, there's enough going on in the market at the moment, that if people can't get set at the auction, they can come to the secondary market and they'll get set. So, participants, and they know this, they won't rely purely on auctioning. If you're relying purely on auctioning, then you probably, maybe need to share your job with someone, because the secondary market functions every day, right? So, but yeah, look, it's just a normal market function. Carbon auctions, around the world, and to be fair, there's not lots and lots of them, but in the main markets, occasionally, the market will go, thanks very much, but we don't need those units.
I love how you refer to it as a market like any other, like a stock market, but it's not really, is it, Nudge? It's a government construct.
It is a government construct, and it's the government putting a price on carbon, right? And to some extent, normal markets, like I say, stock markets, foreign exchange markets, commodity markets, they just go on forever, right? There's no means to an end, whereas a carbon market is actually a means to an end. It's the government pricing carbon and saying, we will put a price on this externality, which is fossil fuels, and have it operate like a market. Eventually, if we get it right, that market probably will come to an end. But for all intents and purposes, it's a market like any other market, but it is a government construct.
And because of that, the government can then make changes to it, right? So aren't they now reducing the number of carbon units that go into it? What other changes are they making?
They're making decisions around how much units are going to flow into the market, where the guardrails are, where they won't sell auction units below, where they will sell extra units into the market to try and let the market do its work. But the government does set the rules, and that's what I think, and all the participants, most of the participants in this market know that, right? The number one risk when you come into the ETS is regulatory risk, because the government can change the rules. And to be fair, they often have to, because you're not going to get this thing as a one set forget ETS could never be that. You're going to have to make changes as things change.
Can you imagine if Wall Street had that much government involvement? I mean, it would be wild, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time on that as well, right? But yeah, look, it's fair to say that, in a lot of other markets, there's, but to be also fair, in a lot of other markets like equity markets and those kind of things, there's a lot of regulation and rules and all that kind of
But they don't set prices or set the supply of shares going into the market.
They don't. But the government doesn't really set the price on carbon. What it does is it says, look, we've got an emission target, and we want people to decarbonise, and clearly we need a higher price on carbon, and we're going to set the supply into that so that we get, and we'll reduce that supply over time as we reduce our emission as we put our emission target down, and therefore the price theoretically should be rising over time, and eventually people will say, industry will say, I've got to change, or I've got to make changes. In fact, all industry has been thinking about this for over a decade. The decision by New Zealand Steel and Fonterra, they were not overnight decisions. They've been thinking about this for a long time. They can see where the price of carbon is going. They see where they need to be, and they make the adjustment.
Just want to be really clear on this one. Yes or no answer. Do you think the regime currently is efficient and fit for purpose? Yes,
but it's never set for purpose, right? So yes, it's the right thing. It's right to have a price on carbon. Have there been some, with the benefit of hindsight and maybe with the slight benefit of foresight, have there been some missteps? Absolutely, but you can't really blame for that. This is a very, very difficult problem to solve with a policy that's not easy, no matter where you are in the world, right? So all in all, New Zealand's done fairly well. The emissions trading scheme is a policy that's been in place for a number of years. You know what hasn't happened? Our emissions haven't dropped. That's what we need to be doing. That's not the failure of the ETS. That's just other things at play, right? We need to, and hopefully with the ETS that's been in play for 2 or 3 years, the Climate Change Commission, the way our Paris target, we will start to see our emissions drop under this architecture. I believe that we will. And hopefully with that, the government gets it right in the ETS at the moment with a few things that it kind of needs to address, then I think we'll be on the road to getting there.
How would you describe this year for the carbon market? One of the craziest ones you've experienced?
Yeah, it's kind of been, it's been one of the most volatile that I've seen in the whole time that I've been involved, right? And there's been some big moves in the carbon market over that decade or 12 years, but nothing like this where you've just, almost seen an about turn to some extent, or you felt was an about turn in policy when the government felt that it was too inflationary to make the changes last year that the Climate Change Commission recommended. Then you had this kind of knock-on effect that caused the market to weaken dramatically. They realise that there's potentially, or they think that there's a problem with maybe too much forestry coming into the ETS, which is a question for debate. So that's kind of created some volatility as well. And then, of course, the court decision that went in favour of the lawyers for climate change action, again, changed things again. So it's been incredibly volatile.
Do you then worry what investors might think about the carbon market, given that there's been all this volatility, the government's had to jump in and make changes? It looks pretty risky from the outside looking in.
Yeah, and there's some people that will look at that and go, that's great, because volatility is, what they want to see. And we're certainly not averse to volatility in a market. But yes, you've got to be a little bit careful, because if it's too volatile and too uncertain, people will say, I can't invest in that market because there's too many uncertainties. And that's the fear, if you like, and there's been a little bit of that this year. I think we're okay, but we've got to be a little bit careful, about the kind of changes or policy on the hoof or kind of acting without necessarily thinking fully in regards to that, because you could scare off, some pretty important participants in the market. So yeah, it's been one of those years.
The CO2 fund is down more than 30% year on year. Might be a hard sell from now on.
I don't think so, because at the end of the day, that is supposed to represent the price on carbon. So it's a passive fund from that perspective. Sure, the price decline of NZUs went down, so the CO2 fund went down as well. They did a good move with some uncertainty. They took all the forestry units out of that fund and replaced them with auction units. So if there's any change to that marketplace, the way that operates, that's kind of bulletproofed. I personally, think that the carbon price is cheap relative to where it is. Don't forget the auction floor is $60. And from December, it's 64 from next year, and the market's currently trading at 60. So, it could be the time to have a relook at your own personal financial circumstances and where that fund might fit in, given where current prices are and where they're likely to go.
Ultimately, where do you think the price of carbon could peak?
Peak is a great question. Often, there's the international bodies, OECD and IMF and World Bank kind of say, look, we need carbon prices circa 150 US by kind of 2030 to decarbonise by 2050. I think we're well above 100 before people just go, got to make the changes. So I think that's the guardrails that the government's put in place for next year is 64, kind of 180 and then beyond, suggests to me that it's probably at some stage in the next few years, $100 market. I think I kind of agree with what the international bodies like OECD kind of say. That's probably where we're heading.
When it hits $100, can you give me a call, Nige, and we'll do this again?
Yeah, I'll give you. Yeah, well, look, yeah, you just wait around for 5 minutes. But but seriously, no, it will take some time. And then, of course, let's not forget technology is always going to have a play. And there's probably technologies over the next 5 to 10 years that we're not seeing yet that will come into the marketplace and probably mean that carbon price doesn't have to run as far as we think it might do today.
Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
If you invest in the carbon market or the carbon fund, I'm keen to hear what you think of the changes. And if you have any more questions about this complex government-created construct, let me know. Now go put your money to work. Thanks for watching Markets with Madison, the New Zealand Herald's show for interested investors. If you want to stay up to date with financial markets, click the subscribe button below and you can watch our other episodes here. Stay up to date with all the business news and numbers as they land on nzherald.co.nz.